Good morning and welcome to the presentation on the Witzenberg Municipality Climate Change Needs Assessment and Response Plan. We will be giving the report back on our findings in this meeting. Today's date is the 24th of July. Looking at the background and introduction, our project team included the Democracy Works Foundation and Green Path Connect. We've got Mira, Lesego, Janavi, and Kelly were working on the project, and Green Path Connect were subcontracted to conduct the needs assessment for Witzenberg. So the objectives of this presentation is to raise awareness about climate change impacts and vulnerabilities in Witzenberg, to build capacity for stakeholders to participate, and then also outline the key vulnerabilities that are related to climate change in Witzenberg, as well as identify priority opportunities that can be explored, and then recommend 5, actually, not 3, priority projects or actions to enhance climate change adaptation in Witzenberg Municipality. So let's set the scene, just taking us back to what is climate change. So climate change is really a general weather condition change. It's something that happens over a long period of time. It's not a day-to-day or a week-to-week type of weather change. It's something that would happen over long time spaces that could even become over decades of change in patterns and of events. Some of the effects of climate change is increasing temperatures, which can cause significant changes in rainfall patterns, leading to some where there would be extreme floods and others where there'd be extreme droughts. This can also lead to secondary impacts like fire and heat stress on crops. There are a lot of other things that can happen as a result. So what is climate change? In effect, it's the trapping of the solar energy from the sun and solar radiation from the sun in the Earth's atmosphere because of the presence of greenhouse gases. So the more greenhouse gases we as a planet create, the more of that heat is trapped inside the Earth's atmosphere, and it's unable to escape. So therefore, it starts heating up and messing with the Earth's temperature. So human-induced carbon dioxide has increased globally, and this has led to climate change and global warming. And here's some evidence of this, where you see as the years have gone, so has the increase in CO2, and especially since the Industrial Revolution, it has shot up in our atmosphere. Here's some local evidence of this happening. We have our own CO2 measuring station in Cape Point, and this has shown a very similar trend in terms of steep uphill climb of CO2. And then to tie it all together, what happens is because of the increases in CO2 and the emissions, so you're seeing an increase in global greenhouse gas emissions, and these are shown in the top graph, where the emissions have spiked since the Industrial Revolution, and this has been climbing. The similar pattern is seen in the second graph, where the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased to the same level. And then to correlate with that, the temperature in the bottom graph has also risen sharply along the same timeline. So this is a showing how these have impacted one another and led to the ultimate increase in temperatures. So where do we see evidence of global warming? This is really about increases in average global temperatures, measuring a rise in sea levels, rainfall events, heat waves, droughts, hurricane intensity, and a lot of coastal flooding around the world. Obviously, we've all seen glaciers melting, and reducing the size of glaciers in the Arctic and Greenland ice caps. And then wildfires have become a norm in many countries, almost happening yearly, and just seeing a lot more intense and extreme differences in weather patterns. So let's look at South Africa's climate picture. So in terms of what we experience in South Africa, this is our projected weather pattern going into the year 2050 and beyond. So you'll see that we are going to have, especially in the Western Cape, there are going to be reduced rainfall. There'll be negative agricultural changes. There'll be increased desertification and a lot heavier rainfall when it does happen. And then some cities along the coast will be affected by rising sea levels. And then you can also see the colors, the red showing that there will be an increase of an average of 2.8 degrees in temperature overall. And if you're looking inland, that's very significant for the agricultural sectors that are operating there. Now let's look at Witzenberg. So these are extracted from the Let's Respond Toolkit and the Green Book, which were developed by the CSIR and the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and Environment. So if we look at this one is showing changes in average temperature. So looking at the north of Witzenberg, there'll be a much higher relative change in temperature towards heating up, and that will affect agriculture in the northern parts of the municipality mostly, whereas the other more central parts won't be as affected by the changes. Looking at average rainfall change, there will be a decreasing of rainfall, and there won't be a lot of rainfall in the area. If you look at the legend, it's showing the lowest rainfall in the center of the municipality, and then some rainfall down in the south. Then looking at the likelihood of fire in settlements. So around Ceres seems to be high likelihood of fire, and then Tilbach and other places, there is also a fire risk. In terms of drought tendencies, currently, the tendency for drought is quite severe. It's sort of middle of the range, so it's already has a tendency towards drought in most of Witzenberg, and this will only increase over the next few decades. Then here we're looking at flood hazards. So there's a very low flood hazard across the center in the dark green, but then as you can see further up into the mountainous areas closer to Wolseley and then somewhere around the bottom near Ceres, there is a higher tendency towards floods. And I think that is just mainly because of the topography of those areas with a little bit more relief, and it's easier for water to travel and flood and pool there. Then looking at population pressure, I think that would be very similar to fire induced by settlements, because you're having a lot more people settling in one place. And I think around Ceres and Tilbach is a very high pressure, according to the Green Book, in terms of increasing populations. And then over here, there's another around fire risk in terms of settlements. There'll be a very big extension around Bella Vista, Prince Alfred Hamlet, Tilbach and Ceres. There will be a lot of concern and management around fire, especially with regard to informal settlements. And then last, looking at extreme rainfall, there'll be a significant decrease. So the extreme rainfall could be either extreme in the positive or in the negative. You could have extreme increases in rainfall or extreme decreases in rainfall. And looking at the map, there will be a significant decrease across most of Witzenberg over the next 2 to 3 decades. And this is something that will need to be planned for, especially considering a large portion of your industry is centered around agriculture, especially fruit production, which is quite, which will need a lot of water. So there'll have to be some kind of planning around that in unison and in conjunction and collaboration with the agricultural sector. So let's look at vulnerabilities at a settlement level. So we looked at, according to the Green Book and the Let's Respond Toolkit, you can assess vulnerabilities from a municipal level. So you look at an entire system, what would tend to be the biggest vulnerability in the system. Then you go down to settlement level and look at each individual major settlement in that municipality and assess where the vulnerabilities are. Then you can even go further into looking at within each individual neighborhood, what would be the vulnerability. Unfortunately, in this case, we didn't have the scope to do that at neighborhood level, but we did look at it from a settlement level. So firstly, we're looking at series. There is going to, in terms of what we've uncovered, we used a lot of tools online through the Let's Respond Toolkit, the Green Book, and then other research that has been done or other reports that have been published to get our data. And then we combine this with informant interviews, with focus groups, and then with the stakeholder workshop to try and extract information from the people on the ground so that we can try and get as much accurate information as possible. Bearing in mind, we did have a very short timeline to capture all of this. So we've tried to combine it as best as we can using the information that we got through the online sources and the desktop research, and then also through our interviews and research. So let's look at series. We have water supply and quality. So there's a dependency on the Breda River catchment for agricultural and domestic work. Then there is going to be an exacerbation around water scarcity and pollution in the water sources around series. Looking at agricultural productivity, there will be significant changes in rainfall patterns and then increases of extreme weather events that may threaten crop yields. There will be a vulnerability to droughts and floods, which can also affect the stability of the agricultural economy. In terms of fire risk, there will be an increased frequency of fires due to climate change, and this also would need an enhancing in terms of a fire response. Tilbach's economy, as we understood it, relies heavily on tourism. This can be impacted by changes in the Breda River system, in the catchment, and this could lead to droughts or floods and affect the scenic quality of Tilbach. Similar to series, water supply will also be dependent on the Breda River catchment, and it will be vulnerable to negative effects of climate change. I think it would also be really important to look upstream of the catchment and understand what's going on in catchments that are further upstream, that are feeding into the Breda River, to understand how it can be managed at a larger scale. Then community health, obviously, in terms of population pressures around these areas, there will be concerns about community health if water isn't freely available, and we'd need to also look at education around community safety and health. Now, looking at Wolseley, the agriculture in Wolseley can be significantly affected if there's a lack in availability from the Breda River catchment. Also understanding that it is very vulnerable to climate change impacts, and many residents depend on agriculture and related activities, making them vulnerable to economic displacement. So there may be also a need to diversify economic opportunities in Witzenberg into the future. Then in terms of ecological health, the rivers and wetlands are crucial for the biodiversity and ecosystem services, especially because they are relatively untouched and quite pristine in many places, and we need to protect and restore where they have been affected. Prince Alfred Hamlet, here in terms of water management, there needs to be a consistent clean supply from this Breda River catchment, and understanding that there are going to be climate change-induced water variability, and we need robust strategies to mitigate and manage that. And then in terms of the agricultural vulnerability, the town's agriculture is mostly at risk, and we need to maybe look at implementing sustainable farming methods in working with the agricultural community a lot more closely, and understanding that communities can also get involved and help mitigate some of the effects. And Optiberg, also it's close to critical biodiversity areas, and it does make it sensitive to ecological disruptions, especially around riparian management and looking at understanding how rehabilitation can take place in terms of ecology. And then there's, again, also dependence on water from the Breda River catchment, and understanding that the local economy is very reliant on agriculture and will face threats in terms of changes in water availability and extreme weather events. So the vulnerability matrix is very extensive. It's a lot of information. These were just some of the key points that stood out to us as very repetitive and coming back through. So if you look at the settlement level assessments, actually it really does seem to cover the entire municipality. They're very similar areas, similar problems or vulnerabilities in each area, some slightly different because of the type of use of the area or what's more prominent or prevalent in the area. But overall, there's going to be a risk around the agriculture, around the economy and economic activity due to lack of water going forward, and then extreme flood events be significant. Obviously, there will be cases of wildfires that need to be managed, but we felt that water really just seems to come up again and again in all of our discussions with stakeholders and in all of the research that we've looked at. And these are things that, in order to just maintain economic viability and maintain economic activity, there needs to be a focus on how to manage water in the future and how to mitigate losses. And then also maybe looking at ways in which the agricultural sector can become more sustainable, work more closely with the municipality, and then also how they can, how the local economy can also diversify and incorporate different means of generating economic wealth in this municipality. So we'll unpack some of the adaptive responses that could happen. And remember, this is very light touch what we're giving you. This isn't the full picture because there is a lot in the background that if you read the report, you'll see there is so much more in terms of vulnerability, but these we felt were just the key that really stood out to us. So let's look at building adaptive capacity. So we're really looking at it in terms of planning in the face of uncertainty. So there are a lot of papers, there are a lot of policies and strategies at a national level that support this. And there are places where, national government have made commitments to adaptation and mitigation. And now recently we saw in the news that President Ramaphosa has made commitments as well in terms of the climate change bill. So there's likely to be a lot of support for work like this, and a lot of activity around this, and potential for collaboration at a provincial level perhaps, or even a national level. So these are some of the other tools that are available for government response, especially local government response, and understanding what can be done. This points to understanding that there will be fiscal support, there will be response strategies, and there will be an open dialogue, especially if Witzenberg is able to connect with the right people, which we did have at the workshop. From provincial government, we had 2 gentlemen at the workshop, and Mira and Michelle can also confirm these were an open door and open discussion to start thinking about how provincial can collaborate with Witzenberg in terms of finding the resources to bring about these adaptation strategies. So really, why do the local authorities need to be climate responsive? It's all really because the critical actions can reduce climate change, even though in this case, we didn't feel that there was a significant need for mitigation, which is about reducing greenhouse gases. I think there are programs in place. There are air quality control mechanisms. Some of the businesses are already employing air pollution control, scrubbers, etc. So there has been some movement in this area, but I don't think it is a big part of industry in Witzenberg. So we didn't emphasize this. What we are doing here is really looking at what is the adaptation that we can do to respond so that we're not vulnerable in future, or we're less vulnerable. So the municipalities really have an important role and influence over how you manage building codes. Are you aligning to the Green Building Council of South Africa? What is the land use planning? Is the land use planning responding to potential threats in terms of climate change? So, for instance, one of the projects that we're going to recommend is around water storage, and what can be done in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of storing water. And then all of the land use planning needs to be carefully thought out around where that could be best used. Urban parks and conservation, again, just managing the biodiversity, ensuring green spaces. They're also really great for water attenuation and reducing floods, especially in an urban setting. And then managing water, electricity supply. I know there is a department that is working with the local the Alternative Energy Development Zone, and they are creating green energy and working with a lot of IPPs. So there's really good movements already happening on the ground. Waste management, how can we create a more circular economy in Witzenberg? And then in terms of transport, can there be an increase in non-motorized transport? And that comes back to land use planning, working with the town planners to start planning non-motorized transport routes, understanding that we need to open up the roads and the spaces for including things like bicycles and walking, so that you reduce the pressure on the roads as well, which also will help with air quality management. And then you're also getting the full picture of what I'm saying. So how do local authorities respond to climate impacts? In effect, there are 2 ways, which I've touched on briefly before. The first is mitigation and the other is adaptation. So mitigation, there are some projects already underway in Witzenberg Municipality, which we've also touched on in the report. And this is what I've also mentioned about the Alternative Energy Development Zone. And these are really great mitigation actions. Also looking at air quality control measures, working with industry, local industry, So focusing on the reduction of greenhouse gases. Then looking at adaptation, this is about building resilience, because we know those impacts are coming. We know that these water shortages and extreme weather events are going to happen. So we need to figure out strategies to brace ourselves and to prepare for the future so that those impacts will be lessened. They won't necessarily be completely avoided. Then the other implications of climate change really run across all of the different sectors in the municipality: water resource management, rural development, land reform, agriculture, environmental management, sewage and other municipal services, and then waste management. So all of these can be working towards an adaptation strategy in collaboration or understanding the full picture of what climate change presents and represents in the municipality itself. So we consulted very closely with two major tools. The first is the Let's Respond Toolkit, and the second is the Green Book. And these have a very specific way of unpacking and understanding vulnerabilities and then creating adaptation strategies and then looking at what is the response plan relative to this specific area with these specific vulnerabilities. So there are ways in which you need to be able to prioritize the needs. So here, if anyone would like to look at this, the risk profiles for the municipality, just go to this link and you will type in Witzenberg. So we have summarized this. So we've used this risk profile in our main report, but then we printed the risk profile separately, and we made an addendum out of it. So you'll see in our report there's various addenda, and you'll find one that is the risk profile or the CSIR climate change needs assessment for Witzenberg. And this is very granular, so it's high level. They haven't done the stakeholder engagement and the deep dive that we did. They've just looked at it from a desktop perspective and tried to understand what's going on. So some of it may be inaccurate, but we've tried to bring it down to a smaller, more granular level. So that's a really great tool. Now, looking at building solutions, this is what I mentioned about understanding how to prioritize needs based on the vulnerabilities. So we need to understand all of the work that we've done. We've looked at input from stakeholders, interviews, stakeholder workshop, the Green Book, the Let's Respond Toolkit, and also reports from provincial government, the IDP from Witzenberg. We've looked at a lot of things and tried to pull them together to create a full picture. So we want to understand the urgency and the severity of these potential impacts. We also look at the level of risk and exposure. So what really is at risk? What is the potential knock-on effect in other areas? And then which of the opportunities to mitigate or adapt will be the most fruitful and will touch on the most potential exposures and risks in other parts of the sector or the municipality. And then you have the adaptive capacity deficits. So this is where there's definitely weak spots where there won't be the ability to adapt and to even recover from any losses. And then understanding the alignment with existing municipal plans. So this is really why we're here today, to discuss these potential adaptation measures and then look at some potential projects. And then in terms of municipal planning, this can go into your municipal planning and you can select the right strategic path to follow. And your feasibility and resource availability, also understanding that in terms of municipal plans, there needs to be funding available, there needs to be the right support from provincial and national government to be able to execute on these. So let's look at priority actions and sector plans. So the implications, we'll look at waste management, water resource management, rural development, land reform, agriculture, and environmental management. But in terms of what we want to unpack, we felt that the top 3 sectors that would benefit the most would be developing and upgrading drainage systems, then also enhancing water storage infrastructure, and then promoting climate smart agricultural practices. So I also understand that the climate smart agriculture is not necessarily in the ambit of the municipal work, but it is something I think that can be supported, and there can be a much more open and inclusive dialogue that can be created between the municipality and the agricultural sector to support any ongoing changes. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's driven by the municipality, but I think creating those open linkages is very important. So we want to look at the win-win scenario. So in the Green Book, that they unpack different scenarios. In terms of the win-win scenario, you want to have a place where there'll be a reduction in flood risk, there'll be health benefits to the public, there'll be economic savings, and then an improved ecosystem service. So flood attenuation is very important in terms of upgrading urban drainage systems. Then looking at the water storage infrastructure, the win-win scenario is that you've improved water security over the long term, you've improved your agricultural resilience, and this is where I think also helping to work more closely with the agricultural sector will also boost the local economy, because you are also wanting to be able to improve water security from an economic standpoint to support the economic activity. And then there will obviously be environmental benefits for that. And then for climate smart agriculture, the win-win scenario is enhanced food security, soil health improvement, and obviously an economic benefits that will be present. So we've looked at some potential projects that could help to improve the adaptation into the coming years. The first is looking at the management of the influx of informal settlements and figuring out a strategy to better manage the seasonal migrant workers that are coming, as we've understood it, into the agricultural sector, and they're coming in and out, bringing their families and settling informally and illegally. Then enhancing water storage infrastructure, installing or developing better urban drainage, and then improved crop management. And we've got another one which I'll present at the end. So looking at the first one, understanding enhancing water storage infrastructure. What we'd like to achieve from this is to capture and store water during the wet periods and even during extreme flood events. The implementation will really just be about building and upgrading dams or reservoirs that exist, or building new ones or extending new ones. This may also require the support of hydrological studies and climate or rainfall pattern studies. So you need to potentially work closely with the hydrologist to understand where would be the best place to install or extend a water storage infrastructure, so that you're not putting it somewhere where there's not likely to be a lot of rainfall. Then responsible parties, that would be the water management department and the engineering department. And then resources required, obviously there'd be funding, construction materials and workforce. And I would also say the expert input in terms of placement would be very, very critical. Timeline, we're looking at completion 2030, and expected outcomes, you want to have reliable water available during dry spells and enough reliable water to support local economic activity as well as households. And the next is proper urban and stormwater drainage. We did feel that came up quite a bit as a problem, and that's also contributing to damage in the riparian zones in many areas and damage to biodiversity because a lot of waste is being carried and a lot of flooding is happening in the settlements. So in terms of the objective, it's around just improving urban drainage, and the implementation here is implementing water-sensitive urban design. So working with the natural environment to attenuate floods, as opposed to just taking flood water that's on the road and then dumping it into a downstream, which will flood somewhere else, which is many of the culverts and stormwater drains that we see operating today. They tend to just do that, and it actually floods both the road and a downstream place. So what we're proposing is looking at not channel management, which is also what one of the stakeholders really stressed. We don't want to focus on channel management. We want to focus on flood attenuation, slowing of water, and spreading of the load. And that will reduce damage to riparian zones, will reduce damage to biodiversity. It will reduce flash flooding, and it will help to just keep any floods or any water that coming into the system safer in terms of where it goes. So this water-sensitive design is really reliant on natural ways to attenuate water, so building attenuation dams in many strategic places, and then also working with artificial wetlands to help to attenuate floods. They really do hold a lot of water, and they let it go very slowly. So it's much safer for everyone and everything included. There is a WSUD guideline available on the Water Research Commission website. It's the full guideline, everything you need to know to implement, construct, and project manage. And the timeline, also looking at completion 2030. It probably will be an ongoing thing depending on the roads department and how roads will be developed and extended going into the future. And it will help to reduce flooding and improve urban drainage. Then in terms of the informal settlement management, it was also noted that informal settlements seem to be a very big challenge in the municipality, and they seem to be growing and also encroaching on natural spaces, which sometimes leads to damage of property. It also has led to fire risks or wildfires, and just a general urban encroachment or informal settlement encroachment into the urban space. So we also were informed by many stakeholders that this is directly as a result of the agricultural sector bringing in seasonal migrant workers, but then many of them stay after their work period is ended and they are then unemployed, and they've brought family members, and the population is growing too fast for what the infrastructure can support. So this isn't something that is directly related to a climate change impact, but these people will be severely impacted by climate change. So we need to be able to do something about proper management. And again, I think this will lead to further closer ties with the agricultural sector and maybe a lot more strategic work with them. So the challenges really is around the pressure that they are putting on the system. And some of the proposed actions that we recommend would be just developing a comprehensive management plan, and then try to coordinate between the agricultural activities and urban planning, and trying to understand where they can best be placed and how they can best be supported. If there's a need to create a separate settlement area for agricultural workers, and then putting in package plants, working with the agricultural sector to make sure that their wastewater is managed properly, and letting them also take on some share of the responsibility there. and then implementing infrastructure improvements to help with the growing population. Another thing that we've seen working really well in other places is a social labor plan, and this is really to ensure the welfare of the workers. And many social labor plans try to encourage local employment as far as possible, upskilling, training of locals, as opposed to bringing in external workers to do the job. So it really helps to develop the community, it improves employment equity, and then you have much better skilled workforce that are resident in the municipality. And then finally, this is not the last one, this is the second last potential project. We're looking at a biodiversity management plan. A lot of the stakeholders felt very strongly that this is an important project to endeavor. It's something that will help to systematically assess and manage the biodiversity in Witzenberg Municipality, and at a much more detailed level. The action would really be around a very comprehensive biodiversity assessment, bringing in specialists, obviously, and then development of a biodiversity management plan and a framework for decision making, and then community engagement and education and monitoring and evaluation. And some of the priority towns that already have a very strong biodiversity and who potentially could be under threat and have vulnerable biodiversity is Op die Berg and Wellesley. But I think that this could be applicable in all settlements in Witzenberg, and it would be if it is something that's going to be done for the entire municipality. Each individual settlement can have its own specific needs addressed in terms of biodiversity management. And then lastly, the climate change communications drive. So we worked on a detailed communications plan for specifically educating and reaching out to residents and anyone in any of the agriculture or other sectors at play in Witzenberg. And it's about just creating standardized messaging, raising awareness, and then engaging the community on climate change, understanding that they can't be building the homes in a riparian zone because of the increased risk of floods, that the crops and the homes will be taken away in the next flood. And just educating people about what's appropriate, what's safe, and what's manageable in this space. So there'll be an approach which will be working internally in the municipality, identifying champions. I think we've already identified some potential champions, which I think we can also give input on that if you need us to. But if you also have your own processes that you follow, we will just sort of leave it at that. But we are open to discussing who potential champions could be. And we would co-create workshops, highlight the cost savings, and then analyze some of the target audiences. And externally, we want to educate in local languages, identify local champions, and then activate activists for climate change in the area and develop programs and really encourage collaboration, especially amongst the economic contributors in the space. The target audience, obviously internally, municipal officials and departments, and then externally, it's schools, agriculture, community leaders, NPOs, businesses, residents of all of the settlements. And the key message is, what are the issues? Addressing knowledge gaps, problems, countering climate change denial, and then solutions, making climate change tangible and helping them see practical ways that they can respond individually to climate change. And the next steps, we wrote here that we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. So we really appreciate your time, and thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity to work with your municipality on solving this problem. We hope that we've understood the problem well, and we've addressed all of the needs, and we feel that we have been able to really look at a deep understanding of what is required. And thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well.